You're gonna need a bigger boat. So serious.
I am Iron Man. This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for September 28th, 2025, and I'm Jada Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody, for this conversation. It is sure to be a doozy as we are talking about a film that nobody else can stop talking about. It is the only movie that exists currently on the planet.
And apparently it is also the movie that no one likes.
Well, the opinions are mostly, I would say, in uniform to some degree, but
Yeah.
there are certain details about it that have quite the variance, that's for sure.
That's fair.
But I would say this is the most unified we've seen film Twitter since Barbenheimer, probably, I would say.
Maybe.
In a general sense.
Is it possible we can trace it back all the way to something like Parasite?
Maybe. I think that's also very fair. Yeah. I mean, it's rare. It's rare. Let's either way, it's rare that we get a weekend like what we just got.
It's certainly the most uniform this year, even more so than something like Sinners, I would say.
Yeah, and Sinners came pretty close, but that was maybe I'd say that was more divisive than what we saw this weekend anyway.
Sure.
Either way, we are very excited because we are here to talk about Paul Thomas Anderson's new film, One Battle After Another. Very excited to dig into this one. We have an awesome guest. I am happy to bring onto the show for the first time the great Matthew Anderson from the Lone Screenplay Nominee podcast, which I was honored enough to join just a few weeks ago. Matthew, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, you were on for a Patreon podcast for First Man, which I'm very sorry for having you sob while watching that. Let's hope this one doesn't make you uncontrollably sob or start thinking about very emotional things. But yeah, you never know.
JD's full of surprises sometimes.
Yeah. But no, it's great to be on the show for sure, and I'm really happy to talk about one of my current favorite living directors around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Same.
Yeah. We're very, very happy to have you here on the show. And honestly, that's an interesting transition to where I would typically go next as we kind of set the table for the conversation. Usually we offer some sort of context as it relates to how we feel about a certain filmmaker or individuals involved with said movie, but we're talking about Leonardo DiCaprio and Paul Thomas Anderson. And I think generally we can all agree, yes, we are fans of those artists. So there's really not much prep here to set up. We are also huge fans of PTA. We've been vocal about that for how long has this show been going, Brendan? 13 years?
Something like that. 11 years for me, but 13 years in totality, I'd say.
Yeah.
Something like that. But we've talked about PTA a lot. We did a whole episode on PTA just last week.
Yeah, exactly. So it turns out we are big fans of one Paul Thomas Anderson, and we were very much looking forward to One Battle After Another. A movie, if I remember correctly, Brendan, all the way back in January, was your number one most anticipated film of the year.
It absolutely was.
Yes. So,
Anytime PTA has a new film coming out, it is an event. There are only a few filmmakers these days that when they have some type of new film coming out, it feels like some type of, it almost feels like a holiday in a way.
Yeah.
And Martin Scorsese is another one of those filmmakers. Whenever he has a movie coming out, it's an event. Christopher Nolan and Paul Thomas Anderson, I'd lump into that same category as well.
I agree. And this weekend, the reaction to this film is very indicative of that. There's no doubt about it.
Oh, yeah.
So with all of that said, I think we can just go ahead and jump right in unless there's any other pretext that you guys want to lay out here before we get going.
I just want to say to the people out there, because this is my first time being on the show, I wasn't on for your Magnolia episode, which it sounds like you guys hated that film. Like, you were very divisive.
Absolutely.
No, I should give a little bit of context of my experience with Paul Thomas Anderson, because funny enough, I actually didn't start watching his movies until right before Phantom Thread came out.
Interesting.
And his first two movies that I saw were Punch Drunk Love and Boogie Nights. And I remembered at the time, don't worry, it's my original thoughts are not the same as they are right now. But I remembered at the time, I liked enough of it. I thought the performances were good and the directing was good for PTA. But I always felt his two films, like for some reason at the time, they clicked to me as like the screenplays he wrote are very underwritten. But then I saw Phantom Thread. And after it got that surprise director and picture nomination, I'm like, okay, I got to see how the hell PTA got into this field. Like, what happened? Is it just like name recognition? Is it the skills he had? And I'm not even kidding with you. When I came out of it, it was very much like that Danny DeVito meme you see on the internet where the camera pushes in. Yes, it was exactly that, where I'm like, I totally get it. I understand why so many people love Paul Thomas Anderson. They hold him in such high regard. I went to an early screening of Licorice Pizza at the AFI Silver Spring to a sold out showing and saw Licorice Pizza there. I even got a t-shirt.
I love that. I saw that earlier. I had to call attention to that.
Yeah, this was a custom T-shirt that was on Redbubble. The guy who created it I don't think he's doing any more of these like custom T-shirts for this brand. But I just thought, well, I have the extra money, I'll buy it. In preparation for Licorice Pizza and the Oscars. So
sure.
Yeah, but I've gotten a chance to see all of his movies. In fact, I actually own some of them right here on Blu-ray. I own Boogie Nights, Magnolia, Punch Drunk Love, There Will Be Blood, Inherent Vice, and Phantom Thread. There's like 4 other movies of his I don't own, and Hard Eight is like really tough to find.
It is,
And I only rewatched that recently thanks to Canopy, so thank you, Public Library Services.
Hard Eight is probably the film of his outside of Punch Drunk Love, which already has a release in this way, but I can imagine Hard Eight getting a Criterion release at some point. I feel like that's one that they would try to seek out.
I hope so.
Yeah.
And I would love to see a Criterion for some of these other films as well. Like, it would be nice to see Licorice Pizza on Criterion, but that's like a whole other conversation we could have.
Either way, and we joked about this a lot last week, but his filmography really is one of those where you can reorder it in any which way, and it's understandable why anyone would choose that order. So
he makes good milkshakes.
Fascinating. Yeah, he certainly does make some good milkshakes. All right, with all of that said, let's go ahead and jump into his latest One Battle After Another. You won't guess it, but the film is written and directed by Paul Thomas Anderson. It stars Leonardo DiCaprio, Sean Penn, Regina Hall, Tiana Taylor, Chase Infinity, Benicio del Toro, and a bunch of others that come and go throughout the film. If you're not familiar with this film, when their evil enemy resurfaces after 16 years, a group of ex-revolutionaries reunite to rescue one of their own's daughter. Okay, let's jump into this. We'll start with you, Matthew. What did you think about One Battle After Another?
Oh, man. I really adored this film. And it's, this year for film, and I don't know, maybe it's just this decade as a whole, especially with the last couple of years since the whole Barbenheimer thing. I feel like I've been a little bit jaded with a lot of these films coming out, and people are telling me like it's the best movie of the year. You got to go see it, and like the best picture quality ever. It's like this is what cinema's made for. Yeah. And I'm watching these movies, and I'm like, like it's fine. Like hot take, I think Sinners is just okay. There's a couple other films that in the last year or so that I'm like, like it's fine, or it's good enough, I guess. But like, as Brandon said, like the moment PTA was announced to doing another movie, I'm like, okay, I'm interested. And I will admit I was a little bit skeptical of this because only by the fact that he's adapting another Pynchon work, Thomas Pynchon, I should say, with Vinland, which is what the inspiration was for this.
Right.
And in my opinion, I felt like the last time Paul Thomas Anderson tried adapting a Pynchon work, it was Inherent Vice. I wasn't the biggest fan of it, although it's not.
Them fighting words.
I know. I know. JD's giving me looks. I know. I'm gonna ignore you for 2 seconds. I understand that over the years it's gained a following, and even the people who didn't like it at the time have grown to appreciate it. I've only seen it the one time leading up to Licorice Pizza. I would like to give it another try, but chances are I'm probably going to have the same feelings I did the first time around. I mean, there are cases where I watch a movie again and I'm like, okay, I get like a newfound appreciation or a new understanding, but that's like the one PTA film of his that I'm not the biggest fan of, but it's not even like a bad movie. Like I think I gave it like a 6 out of 10. So take that for what you will.
Sure.
But yeah, no, this was a really, really good movie that addressed a lot of well, first off, it's his first contemporary film he had done since Punch Drunk Love.
Yeah.
And it was interesting to see how not only he loosely adapted Vinland, which is like 60, I think it was like 60s period political, it's satire, and then jumps into the 80s. And then this one's like a modern take, but then it's like 16 years later. So it's, they don't give you an exact date of when this is supposed to take place. But I thought he handled some of the ideas that we'll talk about a little bit later on, especially with spoilers, really, really well and maturely, to where I thought, wow, he's not playing it too safe, but also he's not bringing this up as like a propaganda piece, almost as like, or spoon feeding us the message. And the performances are really good too. Leonardo DiCaprio is great. Benicio del Toro, Sean Penn, which I'm not even the biggest Sean Penn fan in the world. And I thought this was like maybe my favorite performance of his, like easily better than his 2 wins that he got, honestly. And I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me on that, but that's just me.
Maybe on one of those, I certainly would, but I think the jury's out on the other one.
Yeah. Sure. To be fair. Yeah. I hear your point. And I was just really impressed. I guess the biggest thing that shocked me the most, and I shouldn't be shocked by Paul Thomas Anderson, because we know at the barest minimum he's going to make a competent movie with a lot of actors showcasing their acting chops, and it's going to be better than half the schlock that's coming out in Hollywood even right now as we speak. But what really surprised me the most about it was that out of all the films he's done so far, this is his most mainstream film he's directed in terms of storytelling, while not losing his creative voice that us PTA diehard fans really love to see him do, with how he integrates some of the themes that we see in other films he's done, like Boogie Nights, There Will Be Blood, and The Master. And yet he's still able to have, he's able to combine the two of being like this, normie, general audience friendly kind of film with his own artsy style, all the while he's shedding his skin of taking on this like action adventure, like literally taking shades of like The French Connection and Terminator 2, which I was told ahead of time. I was like, okay, I definitely see The French Connection vibes early on, but Terminator 2 was something I was not expecting.
I saw a lot of Mad Max in this one.
Yeah, a little bit of that too. But yeah, no, this is easily like, I know we have like 3 months left for the year, and we have a whole award season to go through, but this might be my favorite film of the year. And the more I think about it, I might bump it up to a 10, which I haven't done. I haven't done that for a new release since like maybe A Star Is Born. But I'll see how it is on rewatches. But but the more I've been thinking about it, the more I'm like, this is really good work from PTA, an already impressive director as is.
Yeah, you're right that it is perhaps maybe his most accessible film he has made, at least in quite some time, maybe even ever, honestly.
Yeah.
It doesn't quite have the same like psychological strangeness, or it's not as peculiar as some of his other films, even the ones that led directly into this one. Movies like Phantom Thread and Licorice Pizza, the two that directly preceded One Battle After Another. Those are movies that even to this day, I'm not even sure I have a full grasp on. And that's what I love about them. And that's what I think makes One Battle After Another so interesting, is that it does feel more attainable, but you're right. It doesn't disregard PTA's usual ethos, his usual sensibilities. Those are all still here. And I think it's a movie that will still peel back further and further the more you rewatch it. I think there's more to still uncover with this one, which is so true with PTA in general. And I agree with you as well that it's not a movie that spoon feeds you either, which is interesting to say because the movie does make for an interesting companion to another film earlier this year that does spoon feed you, and that is Ari Aster's Eddington. But I do think they are they are a great double feature for opposing reasons. It kind of reminds me of how, this is a weird comparison to make, but back in 1988, when Studio Ghibli released both My Neighbor Totoro and Grave of the Fireflies as a double feature, it seems like it shouldn't make sense, but they both tackle very similar superficial playgrounds, if you will, about innocence and how that can get ripped away and then brought back. But they look at it from different angles. And I bring that up to say that a movie like Eddington is something that looks at this prism through a mega magnifying glass, essentially. Whereas PTA uses a mirror. One movie's looking more outward, the other one's looking more inward. And I find the inward-looking sensibilities of PTA more fascinating here. And I think the human story underneath all of this, which I'm sure we'll talk about, is very effective. All of PTA's movies, I talked about this earlier in the podcast, JD, I think on our PTA episode last week. I call his movies not really movies because they sell themselves as this kind of central conceit or gimmick, but they're not really about that thing. Like a movie like There'll Be Blood, it's not really an oil business movie. The Master is not really a Scientology movie. Licorice Pizza, not really a coming of age movie. Like all of his movies are like that. And I do think One Battle After Another, is very similar in that regard and how it takes contemporary politics to say something less about America, but more about Americans, which I thought was really effective here. I will say this, I am not quite ready to play the best movie of the year or best movie of the decade card just yet. At this point now, it is lesser PTA for me. Of his 10 movies, I have it ranked at number 8, which is kind of a superficial ranking at this point because, JD, to your point earlier, that ranking changes by the minute, by the second. And I'm sure this will change as I think about it further. There are a few things I'll talk about that I'm still wrestling with regarding the film that I'm not sure if I fully love about it, but it is certainly the most propulsive thing that PTA has made yet. Like I could see him playing in an action film sandbox once again if this is the type of movie he's going to make again. And I do think it's very engaging.
Yeah, I don't know how else to begin my thoughts here other than to just say bluntly, this is another masterpiece from Paul Thomas Anderson.
Okay, we're using the M word. I love it.
Utterly blown away by how vast and wide-ranging it is. On one hand, it's this provocative yet timely examination of revolution and parenthood and white supremacy. Yet on the other hand, it's this stoner comedy where Leonardo DiCaprio can't remember passcodes. He falls 40 feet from a rooftop, jumps out of a moving vehicle, and is the world's worst sniper. PTA has always been an audacious filmmaker, but the tonal and narrative swings in this film are as enthralling as anything he's ever done. The opening and closing sequences here are dramatically intense. They are pulsating heart stoppers. That final sequence on the road with the use of those long lenses is arguably a top 5 PTA scene. But at the same time, this is maybe PTA's funniest film to date. It is absolutely hysterical. Every facial tick from Leo, every line delivery, his physical mannerisms, it's all impeccable. And for me, it's often the small details, such as a moment when he realizes that Lockjaw and the police are coming for him, but he just pauses for a brief moment, almost looking into the camera, and just takes another puff of his joint. It is immaculate comedic timing. The entire cast is astounding. I'm sure we'll talk more about that as this conversation goes. Yeah. But that performance specifically from DiCaprio, I think it's top 3 for me. It might even be my favorite DiCaprio performance, especially when you couple that comedic prowess to Bob's emotional underbelly and the love that he shows for his daughter, which I really, really love here as well. And again, like Inherent Vice, like Licorice Pizza, like Phantom Thread, like Punch Drunk Love, for as funny as this film is, there's an emotional and thematic bite here that's deeply, deeply resonant. And interestingly, it's also PTA's most politically overt film to date. But what I love about this film is that it's political without having to constantly revel in black and white politics. Yeah. It's a It's simply a reflection of the fallacy of political extremes and the devastating consequences that come about when those extremes collide, which
Yep.
I think is extremely effective here because there's a lot more showing than there is telling.
Yeah.
It is rare that a film like this has the hype that it does and then it wholly lives up to it. And I think that perhaps summates this film more than anything else.
Okay.
I don't know where it's ranked. I haven't done the exercise of where this fits necessarily within my PTA ranking or best films of the year, but I can say at the very least for 2025, it is one of the very, very best films of the year, hands down.
Yeah, I was really impressed the fact that I guess we shouldn't be this be like, oh wow, what an impressive feat, but it's like
Yeah.
when you see a guy like Paul Thomas Anderson who started off directing in his 20s, and you guys I think mentioned this on the show as well with Magnolia, he wasn't even 30 when he did Magnolia.
Yeah.
And you're like, you would expect a guy like that type of movie to be directed by someone in their 50s, like Robert Altman or Sidney Lumet, to be like, oh, he's like, they've already made their career. Now they're like, all right, let me, take a crack at this and try to do something different. No, PTA is like, I'm going to do this for my third movie. And it's also really interesting to see how much like how we all thought of Nolan when he did Oppenheimer, how he's using a lot of old tricks that he did from his previous films with Paul Thomas Anderson. And he does it to where he's able to take the best and almost like perfect the more weaker aspects, I think, for me, especially with like an Inherent Vice, which I think the problem with that movie for me is that there's not enough comedic moments in that movie to sort of get me through the 2.5 hour slow burn.
Once again, fighting words.
I know. I apologize.
Very funny.
But I also do think that it's also interesting too that with his last couple of movies, with Paul's last few films, it's interesting to see how he's slowly evolved into the more slow burn, atmospheric kind of director. Whereas his earlier career with stuff like Boogie Nights and Magnolia, he had a fast-paced, frenetic, hyper-speed type of style of editing. And one of the ways that I was really appreciative of, this already being different from Inherent Vice is just how quick the pacing is. Like for this being 2 hours and 40 minutes, it just flies by.
Yeah,
to where I'm
well
like,
edited. Yeah.
Even to the points where are very intentionally slow when we see Sean Penn interacting with some of the higher ups of the government. We see, Bob, skirmishing around, and he's trying to, charge his phone at the wreck, and hanging out with Benicio del Toro. It's still moving at a brisk pace to where I'm like, I don't even feel like an hour or two went by. Like even the first 40 minutes of the movie, when we see that really well thought out and well executed prologue of the French 75 going through their whole rescue mission. And we see what happens with Tiana Taylor's character and Leonardo DiCaprio's character.
Right.
It didn't even feel like half an hour went by. It just felt like 10, 15 minutes went by. And then I look at my clock and I'm like, oh crap. Like it's been like half an hour
It's
already.
A full first act, really. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was really impressed even by, talking about performances. Leo is incredible in this. And I'll have to go back and watch his other comedic performances he's done, like Wolf of Wall Street, because it's been a while since I've seen that. And I remember he was really good in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. But this actress, Chase Infinity, I think that's
who plays Willow.
She's fantastic. Like I can't believe this is her feature film acting debut. I know she was on an Apple TV Plus show, but yeah, she was incredible in this. And the fact that she was able to hold her own against both Leo and Sean Penn, I think is incredible and really does showcase that she has a very bright future ahead of her. And whoever found her through the thousands of actors they had to probably get through to get this, daughter character nailed down in terms of casting, bravo, seriously.
It's well cast. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think Leo's best performance of his career might still be Once Upon a Time in Hollywood for me, which
Okay.
it sort of took the comedic sensibilities of something like The Wolf of Wall Street, but then gave it some substance and found something underneath the surface that movie wasn't really interested in going into. That's very much a physical performance more so than anything else. But I would say his performance here in One Battle After Another could be my second favorite at this point, and I think it works for similar reasons as to why his performance as Rick Dalton also worked. Because I think it's actually very challenging to find some type of depth and emotionality with something that is this physical. I mean, essentially what Leo is doing here is Jeff Bridges in The Big Lebowski. More or less what he's doing with a very different emotional edge to it, which is kind of hard to pull off. It really is a tricky high wire act, and I think he's very much up to the challenge. I like a lot of what you're talking about there, Matthew, that there's, in a way, this almost kind of feels like a PTA buffet of sorts. Like there's a lot about his sensibilities here where he's pulling from some of his past work in a way, maybe trying to refine it a little bit. And you could see a lot of those sensibilities almost colliding in a way, in a very smooth way. And interestingly, the movie of his, PTA specifically, that I was most reminded of was actually Magnolia. And it's probably not, it's probably not because of the length. I mean, that's really just a physical comparison that they are his two longest films at this point. But the way this movie is edited and the way it moves is very similar to the pacing structure of Magnolia, which, JD, we talked about this many times.
Yeah.
Magnolia is a film that feels like one continuous scene. That's not really a movie broken up into scenes. It's broken up into movements and sequences more so than individualized scenes. And One Battle After Another kind of flows the same way. A lot of that is probably also due to Johnny Greenwood's score, which, much like John Bryan's score in Magnolia, it just never ends. It almost works like a symphony of sorts. And that symphonic energy is why a movie like One Battle After Another doesn't feel long. It's the perfect argument that, sometimes short movies feel too long because they don't work for their justified lengths. And the opposite can also be true. And I think that's the case here. It's a very well and tightly constructed movie that utilizes its length to its best advantages.
Yeah, I mean, I think to call this a PTA buffet is extremely apt. I think Magnolia, especially in terms of the editing, is an apt comparison. There's a lot of inherent vice here in terms of the comedic prowess of this film.
Yeah.
I think in terms of character banter, a little, obviously tonally it's very different, but I thought about the way he stages and composes The Master and to get that banter the way that he wants it to be. And
you got some of those John Demme shots too, where the characters are looking into the camera. That's also in The Master too.
Yeah.
And the way he implements score here is obviously indicative of a lot of his other movies. It very much is a PTA buffet. And I think maybe what comes to mind the most in the middle of all of that, outside of maybe the cinematography, because the cinematography is, again, extremely wide-ranging and vast, as I noted in my opening thoughts. But I really love how he frames character here and then lets the actors do all of the heavy lifting. And to me, that's where Leo's performance is so impactful to me. And I love how, again, it's ranging even in its own right.
Yeah.
And I joked in my opening thoughts about some of the comedic bite of this film with Leo's performance. And there's a great physicality to it that I really love, but there's equally these great small moments here where he just lets Leo be Leo. And sometimes it's for comedy's sake. And sometimes, and this kind of gets to the heart of the matter for me, it's that emotional underbelly that bursts out, especially in the back half of the film. One of the more underrated moments of this movie is this moment where he escapes the hospital and gets into a car, is driving down the road. The urgency of the situation could not be higher.
Yeah.
The stakes are extremely felt and dense. And what he wants to talk about is that he never learned how to do his daughter's hair. That's what he wants to talk about. And that's the brilliance of the writing and and how that's married to the performances here, and a lot of what you mentioned earlier, Brendan, in terms of PTA frames his films as this, but really underneath there's something completely different. And this is a movie about politics and revolution, and we can certainly get into that. But underneath all of that, this is a father-daughter movie. That's what this is at its core. It's about parenthood.
It's a girl dad movie.
Bob's choices in this film, everything he does from the moment she is born, is about his love for her and keeping her safe. Mm-hmm. And so as he escapes the hospital, he's not thinking about himself. He's not thinking about anything other than, where is she? How can I get to her? How can I save her? And on a deeply personal level, he's thinking about possible regrets and guilt that he's carrying as it relates to his own parenthood.
Yeah.
Because now in his life, he's made choices where, and he admits this later on in the film, that he got too safe, that he got too comfortable. And as a result, he became someone that maybe he wishes that he didn't, when the stakes are this high and he doesn't really have the skill set to get her back. But this moment about, I wish that I learned how to do her hair, like that kind of humanity, and how PTA simply gets out of the way in that moment and just lets Leo perform, and Leo kills it. It's absolutely incredible. It's easily one of the best moments of the film, and maybe one of my favorite moments of the year, honestly. There's just this subtle emotionality to this film that in these little moments, they kind of burst out. And for me, that was easily one of my favorites.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Paul has, I think, 4 children in real life with his partner, Maya Rudolph. And you could tell this movie is very much about his relationship with his children. I mean, and you feel that. And that intimacy is really why I think this movie is going to work on repeat viewings. I think as a piece of drama, it's really going to stay. It's kind of similar to There'll Be Blood in a way, which has pretty on the nose ideas regarding capitalism and religion and how they're not so different. But what makes me keep going back to that movie is the humanity of Daniel Plainview, or lack thereof, and what his motivation was, because I think there's a lot to unpack and uncover with that. And I think the same thing could be said here in a very different way, but superficially, I think it's a movie that's going to reveal itself more given the intimacy of it all. And that's the thing I'm more interested in.
Well, one thing I was also impressed by too, I mean, we're also bringing up like this is a father-daughter film essentially, but what I was really impressed by, and this is something I don't know if you guys listened to Oscar Wilde, but Sophia Cinemello brought this up really well that I didn't even think of either. Most of Paul Thomas Anderson's films, at least the way he's presenting some of the ideas and themes of said films, Paul takes them in a more cynical way. Like There Will Be Blood is a very cynical movie, especially with how you're dealing with Daniel Plainview, who has very little humanity in him. And, you know, and he puts on sort of this bravado show almost of like, oh yeah, I'm a father and this is my son, HW. But with this one, he plays a lot more sincere and
a more hopeful movie.
Yeah, it's a hopeful movie. And, you know, especially with how, and I also want to say to everyone out there, I know that we're in dark times now, especially with here in our country. But with this movie, I feel like even though the film does have a fair amount of darker moments in the film, especially with its politics and how our, you know, in this case, our corrupted government officials are pretty much taking power and the voice away from the voiceless, there is this sense of hope that Paul instills in us of like, no matter how dark it's going to get, our next generation will get us out of this darkness and back into the light, like we should have gotten, you know, years ago, and stayed in that way. But that's something, and I think that's also what political satire can do really well, is commenting on not just what's going on within our reality, but also even commenting on how you know, and obviously you could have made it just like a fun summer blockbuster if you wanted, but Paul really brought a lot of humanity to this script. And by having that father-daughter relationship, even though we only see him together like a couple maybe like once before the whole events kick off, so to speak, but even then we already understand the relationship between, or the dynamics between Willa and Bob in of itself, like right before we even get to the whole situation.
Sure.
And I was really impressed again with just the fact that Paul decided to take a more hopeful route with this, which was something I was not expecting at all.
Yeah. It's a good point.
Mhm.
That's a great point.
Yeah. Well, and again, I think that's where the brilliance of this film lies in terms of how it incorporates humanity with politics. And I do think this is a very political film, but again, as we've already talked about, it doesn't have to spell out political ideologies or relish in conspiracy theories. If anything, PTA is clearly just using it to make a mockery of the people whose ideals are almost cartoonish, even if they take them very seriously, while also outlining the shortcomings of regular people whose convictions manifest in these ambiguous ways, which is why some of the comparisons I've seen to this film I do think are a little disingenuous. Ultimately, I think the politics here are servicing a broader theme as it relates to the humanity or the lack thereof of these characters. And I love the duality that for Lockjaw and the Christmas Adventurers Club, it's in service of absolutely nothing. And for the revolutionaries, it's in service of their compassion for change, but also their simple vulnerabilities. Because when push comes to shove, they can't by themselves overcome the systems of power. The comparison, and I know that invoking this is going to irk some people given its author, and I totally understand. I'm not the biggest fan of the author either. But the comparison that makes the most sense for me outside of PTA himself is Harry Potter. I thought a lot about Harry Potter with this film. Voldemort failed because he didn't understand the power of love and friendship. That's the actual crux of this film. And that's the difference between those who hail Saint Nick and those fighting for freedom. As we've already talked about, Bob's actions are simply rooted in his love for Willa and getting her to safety. Obviously, there's a political conviction to revolution, but at the heart of those convictions is wanting a world that is more powered by love and friendship. And I think PTA does a great job of converting that here. Dumbledore would have been a big fan of this film. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's all I'm
Well,
saying.
well, now, all because you said this, JD, in about a month's time or so, we're going to find out that PTA's next movie is the new Fantastic Beasts movie. Or
Oh
something like
God.
that.
No, definitely not. But
I mean, to be fair-
thematically speaking, this has a lot in common with Harry Potter. It
To be
does.
fair, this is also a Warner Brothers property, so
JD, you're onto something.
you might be onto
Just saying.
something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But no, yeah, and I do also want to mention too the Johnny Greenwood score as well, which I think is incredible. I'd have to go back to There Will Be Blood and Phantom Thread because I think those scores might be a little bit better for me. But what Johnny Greenwood does here is really impressive, and God, there's a fair amount of cues he uses in the film. I think a really effective use of tension, despite it being just to an outsider, just like, oh, it's just random piano noises he's making. But it weirdly enough reminded me of like Poor Things' use of score, where in any other context for any other movie, the score would not fit
It would
those
be
films.
annoying. Honestly.
Exactly. It would
Yeah.
be just like a lot of noise, and that's it.
Yeah.
Whatever the Shakespeare quote was, sound
Well,
signifying nothing. Anyways,
Cacophonous, is that what he says or something like that?
I think so.
Yeah.
But anyways, but here the score works really effectively, especially with the chaos going on both internally for Bob and also externally, especially with him running through Sensei's home and going through to the immigrant kids and and getting them into the church and such. And you hear this piano noise going on, and then Sensei's like, all right, Bob, follow these guys. They'll take you out of here and things like that. But I also want to credit, I don't know if you guys noticed this either, but there's a track later on in the movie where if you took where it almost seemed like put the tempo back to normal and you add a few more keys, it honestly sounded like Johnny Greenwood was doing his own take on the Wicked Witch of the West theme.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah, because I'm listening to it even in the theater, because I think someone mentioned this before I saw the movie, and I'm like, wait, there's a Wicked Witch of the West theme in here, and it's during I think it's called Like Tom Cruise is the track, but I was dying of laughter watching that scene, and I'm listening to it, I'm like, wait a minute. Oh my god! Like he actually like he raised the tempo and just took a few keys out and boom, there it is.
That's funny.
I wanted
hilarious.
Yeah, wow.
That's hilarious
Yeah.
if that's true.
That is
whoever
very funny.
whoever does a Q&A with Johnny Greenwood and Paul, I want them to ask if that was the inspiration for that track, because if it was, like, bravo, man, that's hilarious.
That is
Yeah.
hilarious.
And even the big chase that has been teasing up in the trailer with the hills and such, I'm blown away by the music, and I'm like, it's really good tension building music. That again, even with how the music is used, it's like if this type of score had been done for any other movie, it would not have worked. But because of what this is, and also it helps too that Paul and Johnny Greenwood have collaborated, I think, on almost every movie since There Will Be Blood. So
yeah,
they
certainly
have
the
a
start
good
of that new
relationship.
phase of PTA's career. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is definitely a collaboration, and they work together to know what works and what doesn't in terms of Johnny Greenwood's style of composing. But yeah, I was really impressed with that for sure. There's a couple other things I do want to bring up, but I don't know if we want to get into spoilers yet, but I'll save them for that, or if not, then I'll keep my mouth shut about it.
There's certainly a lot that we can talk about when we get to spoilers, because I have a lot to say about certain characters and certain, maybe not reveals, but just certain actions that they take that are best for people to go in blind, because I think there's some surprising elements with certain characters that the marketing is certainly not teasing that I think is really interesting. But I will just bounce back on the score from Johnny Greenwood here once again. This is a perfect example as to why kind of like grading or critiquing a movie score, it's more about how it serves the movie, because there are some scores in this case, like I don't think I could enjoy this score on its own terms. Like if I were to just listen to it, if I bought the vinyl and put it on my record player and just kind of let it play, it's like, this is not helping me at all.
Trying to write a paper,
Yeah, and I say this as a fan of Johnny Greenwood, and not just his movie compositions, but many of his works outside of cinema, whether it be Radiohead or The Smile. Like I'm a fan of all of his work. This is something I don't know if I can enjoy listening to on its own, but that's not a bad thing, because in a way it's maybe even trickier for a composer to create something so noisy and cacophonous that doesn't really sound musical at all, and yet it can't work any other way in the movie that it's serving. Like that's
It's like
kind of
the
difficult.
exact opposite conversation we had with Conclave last year.
Yeah.
Where I could listen to that score on its own terms all day. I think it's great, and I think it works horribly in the context of that movie and what it's trying to accomplish.
And then you have
this
every
is doing
John
the exact opposite.
And then you have every John Williams score, which just does all the above every time.
Oh, exactly. I mean, I'm with you guys. I think the score here is excellent. I loved it. I think it's extremely effective. I have not attempted to listen to this outside of the film yet. Maybe I will give that a go and report back. So I don't know. But it is constantly unnerving and creating this disorienting experience that I just think works incredibly well with this movie. I think from here we can move the conversation into spoilers, as I know we want to get into some detail, maybe talk about the ending of this film. I want to start here, though, and I want to circle back to this film being about parenthood. And I want to read something from a review that I read, if you guys will indulge me here. So forgive me. I'm going to monologue here for a moment, because I do want to read this, and I think it's very important to this film. So, again, this being a father-daughter movie at its core, and I love the film for that. But the reason it's a father-daughter movie is because Willa's mother, Perfidia, walks out on her when she is just an infant. And I really do love how the film handles this. I understand why it's divisive and people do push back on the character, but I actually think the way PTA handles it is quite assiduous and it leads to a really well-earned emotional moment at the end of the film. And I think to articulate it, I want to read these thoughts from friend of the show, Kenzie from Offscreen Central. We all love Kenzie.
Yeah.
And this is what she had to say. This is a little long, but I need to read this because I do think it's important to this movie. Quote, Perfidia comes from a line of revolutionaries, her mother tells Pat at the beginning. What is Pat going to do with this baby? It instantly puts in your head that Perfidia won't want this baby. We're thinking she only wants to be a revolutionary. She only wants to change the world when she clearly ends up going through postpartum depression and anxiety. Pat is keeping her mother's word top of mind. He's thinking Perfidia doesn't want this baby. She's leaving. Meanwhile, she's overwhelmed. She's distant from her lover. Her body isn't what it was. Her mind can't keep up. Women who struggle with any kind of postpartum disorder know this all too well. And on top of it, she's itching to get back to changing the world. She doesn't know how to be a mother. And in reality, she wasn't given the tools to be a mother and to be a revolutionary. Every parent struggles with their identity crisis when they are trying to navigate raising a human, keeping their sense of self, and living in a world that is completely overwhelming to reckon with. The story keeps her top of mind the entire time, too. What the nuns saying where Perfidia is means trouble, and they see it in Willa's soul. Even Lockjaw saying he smells Perfidia's evil witch in Willa, despite not being in Willa's life. She's all around her and in her. As Willa becomes another revolutionary in her mother's family tree, we end on a natural progression with her yearning to become someone who would change their world as her mother hoped, but also with the words of Perfidia to her daughter, the real Charlene. Quote, are you happy? Do you have love? What will you do when you grow up? Will you try to change the world like I did? Perfidia struggles the way all parents do. We want so much for our kids, but still want so much for ourselves. She chooses a selfish way out to keep living her own dream, but at the end, all she wants is to be with her family. Being a parent can feel like an overwhelming sense of compromise with your own wants and desires. It's hard to not feel a guilt of passing it on to how your child will choose to live their life. What PTA does with Perfidia and Willa is honestly so beautiful to me, end quote. Obviously, I can't relate to being a mother specifically, but the idea of becoming a parent while trying to maintain a sense of self is very relatable to me. And I have seen postpartum depression up close. I have seen what that looks like. And I do think that, as Kenzie lays it out here, I think PTA does a great job of tapping into how that creates such a massive conflict in terms of one's sense of self and their emotional upheaval, and how this completely changes your life, because it does. It absolutely does. I think Paul Thomas Anderson couldn't have got that more right at the beginning of the film with that character. And it's a great narrative crux that leads Pat/Bob into this great evolution that he goes on throughout the film, which we've already kind of touched on already. And then that letter that she gets at the end of the film is honestly one of, if not the most emotional impacts of the film for me. I loved it. Again, I know there's been some pushback on the character, but I wanted to read Kenzie's review there because I think she articulates perfectly actually how this film gets it 100% correct.
Well, I think she does so as well. I really like what you had to say about that, and that you chose to read her words there, speaking directly from her point of view. I think that's very appreciative. And it's a great reason why Perfidia is actually my favorite character in the movie. And honestly, it's not even close. Teyana Taylor's the standout for me, both in performance and in the characterization of Perfidia, which a lot of that is on PTA for handling it so gracefully. Because in any other filmmaker's hands, less nuanced filmmaker's hands, this movie would have been very quick to judge the Perfidia character and some of the actions that she takes. And there is still room for a potential reading that way, that perhaps a character like Perfidia has perhaps just let radicalized America take over her life, that she cares more about her beliefs than her relationships at a certain point. If you want to read it that way, I think that's perfectly fine. But I don't think the movie that we get here, and I don't think PTA is judging her. I think it is offering another side to this coin that Kenzie's laying out there in those thoughts that she wrote down so eloquently, that there is a psychological angle to this that we might not be considering as to why certain people behave the way that they do, especially parents, new parents who are just not at this point in time equipped for those responsibilities, and they take it out in the wrong ways. On one hand, the movie doesn't let Perfidia off the hook necessarily, but on the other hand, it's giving you a reason to sympathize with why that might be. And that's a very tricky thing to pull off.
Yeah.
Well, even with the idea, I love the fact that after she gives birth to Willa, and then she decides, I'm going to leave my family and go off and rejoin the French 75. I love the fact that she, the postpartum blue, you guys mentioned, but also the fact that there are consequences to her actions.
Yeah.
By having the child, she could have easily said, I'm done. I'm no longer doing this. I have to be more mature. I have to be thinking about others instead of myself. And you could read it as, she is very selfish and decides to go out. But regardless, though, her actions have consequences to them. Like, she shoots a security guard, and because of that careless mistake that could have easily been preventable by the group, they're all busted. At least half of them are busted, and they're going off to jail, especially with her. I also want to read from someone else from Off Screen Central. Jillian wrote a tweet out saying that the French 75 is such a great example of how social movements are fragile and can self-combust as time goes on, as it loses its way compared to Sensei Sergio's more effective community organization that has a goal. Which I think that's true. And the French 75, even their methods were very controversial and divisive in a way, but they were trying to do good. But what Sensei is doing is a much more effective way. And even this idea of the government taking over, as I mentioned before, taking the voice from the voiceless, and like the fact that like we still need to have a community here within our own cities, that we still need to be here for each other regardless of what the higher ups tell us otherwise. You guys are you guys think you have power here. No, we're taking that away from you. And it's like, no, it really does come down to the community that you're in. And I think what PTA is doing is just so, again, just like a really like realistic way, but also like in terms of capturing some of these characters' actions and reactions and consequences, but also doing it in a way that sort of pushes the story forward as well. Like he's doing two things at once almost.
It's all in parallel. Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
And that's the brilliance of how he handles Perfidia here, because it is a perfect microcosm of really everything we've been talking about in terms of how there is a larger context in terms of what is happening here politically, in terms of revolution and trying to push back against systems of power. But all of that is funneled through this deeply human lens. I do love that every consequence that we see here, to your point, Matthew, it begins with Perfidia having this child, going through postpartum depression, feeling completely isolated and alone, something that Bob does not recognize at all. Does nothing to help her in any of that. And she's feeling overwhelmed as if her identity has been taken away from her. And she struggles with that. And that one choice leads to what is essentially generational overflow of consequence, right? In the immediacy of her choosing to leave, they go back out into the world. They go to rob a bank. She shoots a guard, as you noted earlier. And in the immediate impact of that, not only is the group vulnerable, people die. Her friends, the people that help her out die. They are die. And then Bob is sent on the run. And while he's able to exist for 16 years or whatever the time lapse is, what we see in the back half of the film and Lockjaw going after Bob and Willa, that is a direct result of Perfidia's choice at the beginning of the film. So in this unintentional way, she puts her own daughter in danger and
Yeah.
almost kills her. So like there is a lot to this film that, again, it has this broader, larger scheme of politics and revolution, but everything that PTA really wants to explore here is at the human level, is at the relationship level,
Well,
and the
yeah.
choices we make and how we are defined by those choices.
Well, and by focusing on the human level there, it's where the politics of this movie become more nuanced. Somehow this movie is able to be pro-revolution without being pro-political violence, if that makes sense, which is kind of another tricky thing to be able to pull off. If anything, PTA seems to be more interested in the extremism of political disagreements these days. Another movie I was reminded of, JD, you brought up a movie like Harry Potter, which is a very interesting comparison to make to a movie like this, but you made a great point as to why. So I'm going to make another even stranger comparison, I guess. But the way that this movie frames its political dichotomies kind of reminded me of Hayao Miyazaki's Princess Mononoke, which was way more interested in the conflict itself as opposed to who is right and who is wrong and who may or may not have fired the first shot. The movie does ask you to maybe ponder on what those situations could have been, but if anything, in that movie, Miyazaki was more interested in how two feuding sides refuse to acknowledge where there might be some common ground. And it's the extremism that is ultimately the problem. And I feel like this is a movie that's sort of saying something similar, just in a more, contemporary American lens.
Yeah. And I think another important note in all of this, when we're talking about the human level and the choices these characters make and how that relates to extreme political actions and reactions, so much of Perfidia throughout most of this film, she is framed as what? She's framed as being a rat.
A rat, yeah.
That's what they call her. Yet, under the same pressures, every other member of the French 75, when they are under the scope, they do the exact same
it's very hypocritical.
thing.
Yeah.
Everybody rats. Everybody rats. And I think that is important to this film in terms of, again, the fallacy of these extremes and perhaps the
how quickly people jump to
vulnerabilities.
those conclusions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because at the individual level, people do want to protect themselves and they want to protect their families. And that is innately human. And I do think that PTA wants to denote that here.
Yeah.
And again, I think from a narrative perspective, maybe that puts more of a microscope for Perfidia, given that she runs out on an infant at the beginning of the film. But as the film goes, and we do see a larger context, and we do see all these characters essentially regurgitate the exact same thing.
Yeah.
It puts into perspective, like, again, just the human instinct to want to protect themselves.
Yeah, I want to say something really quickly and then toss it back to you, Matthew, because I know Judy and I have been talking for a little while already.
You're good. No, this is good. I like this.
But one thing that I think PTA does really interestingly to almost symbolize that extremism regarding political disagreements, it's the sexual tension of sorts between Lockjaw and Perfidia, which kind of opens up the movie. She embarrasses him in a very hard way.
Yeah,
literally. Yeah.
Oh, that was great. I love that.
I love that too. I love the way that she takes advantage of him in a certain way. But I don't know if this was PTA's intent, but it almost seems to suggest that we're at a point now where we, as a radicalized America, kind of get off on the extremism now. Like there's almost something like erotic about it, which is kind of a scary thing.
Yeah.
And I almost feel like that dynamic between the two of them and how there actually is maybe some like genuine sexual tension between the two of them. Is it really because of how they each stand up for completely opposing sides of this spectrum, and they kind of love it now? Like, and that's kind of a weird thing. I don't know if that was the intent, but I kind of got a sense that there was like this almost like erotic energy about the way that we handle political extremism nowadays. It seems that way. I just found that kind of interesting too.
Well, I also find really interesting going on to Lockjaw in of himself, which I think part of it goes into why I think this might be my favorite performance of Sean Penn so far, is the fact that he is a psychotic dude.
Yeah.
He's a pathetic man who is this masculinity, toxic man bro, especially with like Willa asks him, why is your shirt so tight? He's like, I'm not gay, I'm not a homosexual.
Oh yeah.
If that's what you think, because it's immediately what these kind of like toxic man bros would think of immediately when someone even comments on something like that. And they have these like bulging muscles and such. But I really liked Sean Penn's crazy frenetic energy with this character, but he also goes through a bit of like a conflict story in of himself where he is very internally conflicted about wanting to be obviously he's aroused physically, but even sexually as well. But also he's very much conflicted of whether or not he should, really dive into this relationship that he really shouldn't have with Perfidia. And that also ties back into the Christmas adventures when they ask those random questions of like, have you ever had or are currently having sexual relations with non-white people? And the way he reacts to that question, I thought was like really strong acting from Sean Penn. And I'm like, I've never seen him be this good, because you see him holding back some of the emotions as well when he's asking when he's being asked these questions and he's trying to answer them. And I'm like, wow, I've never seen him be this good as an actor. Because again, I've always considered the guy just to be, like another one of those actors who is trying to, in a way, do it for attention, where he's like, look at me, I'm an actor, oh, wow, I did so many of these things, like I Am Sam, and all this stuff. And I'm like, oh God, who cares? Really, man? Like, just shut up and do the work. Do what Daniel Day-Lewis is doing. And you sit down, you do the work, you shut up, and you go off with your day. But no, he's got to flaunt his ego. But I was really impressed with this, where I'm like, okay, it's actually a pretty good performance from him. I could talk more about the.
I'll go to bat for Mystic River, but I will agree with you on your earlier point. I could take or leave his performance in Milk.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mystic River, I think is well deserved.
Oh, okay. Because I personally wasn't. I remember not being the biggest fan of Mystic River. It's been years. But I remember, I was like, I don't know. There's other actors you can go for. But also too, Christmas Adventures, that whole subplot. I don't know about you guys, but when we were introduced to, I think it was like Tim White or whoever it was who walks into the house with the blue Mustang or whatever, and you hear. What was the rent? I'm looking through my notes here. Ella Fitzgerald's "Hark the Herald Angels Sing." When that's played, I don't know why, but immediately I was like, wait a minute, how is this tied to the story? Like, I don't remember this character at all, and I'm like, what's going on here? Are these like a bunch of white supremacists? I'm like, what? And then even when he's going through the basement with like that Stanley Kubrick shot that he does with the wide angle lens, and he meets the Christmas Adventures family, which I thought was a pretty funny scene, I must say, in of itself, of how ridiculous it is. Like, here we are, we're trying to treat these guys as like the most serious threatening characters, and they're so pathetic, especially when they call, I think like one of them says like old what was it, Jim Nicholas or Saint Nick, or they said like hail Saint Nick, hail Saint Nick, and then they said like one of their buddies had died and they gave him like a weird nickname. And I'm like, I'm sorry, like I can't take you seriously as a club when you're doing stuff like this, especially the Christmas Adventures. I'm like, come on.
Which is the point. I mean, it's obviously totally satirizing that ideology. But I think what's interesting, and sorry to kind of circle back to this, but Brendan, you made a fascinating point, because as it relates to Lockjaw and his objectification of black women, I do think my guess is PTA's intent there is more so, again, that, that satirizing of that ideology. But I think what's interesting about your interpretation of his and Perfidia's relationship, that sexual tension, and how genuine that may be. I do love the symbolism that you're talking about, and the idea that if it is genuine in terms of how we live in terms of the discourse of these political extremes, but the reality is that it's more like in this murky middle.
Yeah.
And that symbolism of the two of them kind of being genuine, if it is genuine, I think that interpretation, whether that, and I don't think that was the intent, but I love that interpretation that it is more representative of what the middle actually is for most people.
Because I think there are a lot of people out there who do maybe fall in the middle, but they feel like they can't admit that at this point now.
Yeah, especially when they're trying to adhere to certain social structures, or maybe they're trying to get into a secret club.
Yeah.
And so they have to present themselves this certain way, even though in reality they're kind of more in the middle. Again, I love that interpretation. I don't know if I fully buy that's what PTA was going for in terms of the satire, but I think that's an unintentional ramification of this film and what it's trying to accomplish in terms of art.
Oh yeah, I think if anything,
ideas.
PTA's intent was maybe just to showcase the contradictions of a character like Lockjaw, and how hypocritical someone like that would ultimately be for their own gain. I think that maybe was what stemmed his PTA's initial intention and inspiration for that. It's just what makes PTA so great is that he knows how to frame and compose certain things that allow you to read it differently, or they lead themselves to different results. And I think that's another great example as to why he's so good at what he does.
Yeah. But to your point, Matthew, the way PTA frames that club, and it's silly and ridiculous, but I think the reason it really works here, as caricature-ish as they are, is that the characters treat it very seriously. Like it's not a joke to them.
That's so funny to me.
That I got to see the movie again for that particular reason, because those sequences with the Christmas Adventures Club, I think they call themselves, that was the part I think I was a little bit mixed on, because I felt like maybe that was a better opportunity for PTA to get even goofier with the satire, especially given
I don't know how you get more cartoonish.
Yeah,
I kind of thought those sequences were bland. That I think that's, and maybe I got kind of caught up in the fact that they do feel that it is so serious to them that maybe I just got sort of enveloped by their creepy interpretation of what they're doing, that I didn't really see enough of the satire there. I love the line where they all say "Hail Saint Nick." Because instinctually you think they're about to say "Hail Satan," and in many ways they're basically saying the same thing. Like that was a moment where I thought, okay, is there something here I'm just missing, or do these sequences just lack a little bit of conviction from PTA's part? Is he just a little bit timid in trying to portray this a certain way, given that this is a demographic that I think you've earned the right to be as ridiculous with as possible?
I found it incredibly I don't even know what the right word is. Like I can understand perhaps that interpretation if you're maybe caught up in them taking themselves too seriously. To me, that was part of the fun.
And that might be it for me.
That's what made those scenes as goofy as they are. But I did find PTA creating an extreme mockery of that ideology for sure.
I think what sold it on me as to why I didn't take it as seriously with those scenes was when Sean Penn was being interviewed and he was being asked, like, did you make any expensive payments or whatnot? And he's like, no, I don't think so, but I have a jet ski. And just the way he delivered that line, and they're like,
honestly, Sean Penn made those sequences more intriguing for me. As much as I found some of those sequences a little bit bland, I thought the final one where, I mean, we're in spoilers now, where they actually killed him off, that was the one that did work for me. But a lot of that is because of, the Sean Penn of it all. I think doing some really clever things with the manipulation of the moment, I thought he was really good at.
Yeah.
I also Oh, sorry.
No, I was
Well,
the last thought I'll have on that. I do wish that I wrote down some of the lines of dialogue in that scene to perhaps bring some further evidence to it. Unfortunately, I don't have that information in front of me, but I don't
watch it
know, from my perspective anyway, I don't know what PTA could have done to been more goofy with that sequence. I found the whole thing to be lunacy in the best way possible. It was really funny.
Okay.
And again, I think part of the joke and the reason it works is that, and maybe why it's not full cartoonish, is because the characters don't think it's a joke.
Kind of
He,
like doing the
he
whole
walks-
zone of interest thing in a way, where it's like the
Yeah.
mundanity of evil and they don't even realize that it is.
Yeah, perhaps a little bit of that. Like he walks into, whether the music was diegetic or not, he walks into that room with that Christmas song playing in its entirety, and the exchange that he has along the way. Like, there is this phoniness to it that I think is quite palpable as someone sitting in the audience, but they don't see it that way. Hail Saint Nick is just something that is part of their lingo. That is real to them.
Yeah.
And maybe it's my sense of humor. I don't know.
I did
but
think that was a
loved
funny
it.
line. That was a very funny
Yeah.
line.
Well, the two things I want to bring up about those scenes is, one, I do think it's ironic that they're playing that version of the song, especially when, again, it's a white nationalist group, Christmas Adventures, and they're playing a cover by a black woman in that version. And I'm like, the irony here in this. And that does add into the political satire.
Yeah.
I also wonder, and Paul's also done this too in the past, where he sort of done almost like a deconstruction of certain genres. Like Brendan had said really well earlier in the episode, how The Master's not really about Scientology.
Yeah.
There Will Be Blood isn't really about the oil business, and even Magnolia, it's not your typical montage of various stories that are intertwined together. It does deconstruct those movies too, and I think that's what Paul Thomas Anderson is doing also with these scenes as well.
Sure.
Is he is essentially taking what would be a typical exposition dump, and by having it added in again with the political satire, and just make it also outlandish with how they're taking all this lingo, which is so stupid, and it's like, what the hell's going on here, and making it so serious. I honestly do think he is taking notes from Kubrick, because Kubrick did that too, even in Dr. Strangelove, where he is taking some of the more political satire and making fun of how ridiculous these situations are, as well, even back when he did that, and some of his other films too, like Barry Lyndon as well. And yeah, it really does evoke that, like, all of his, going back to even what I said earlier in the episode, where PTA is taking all of his tricks that he learned from his older films and is implementing them into this like brand new style. He's been trying to get himself into this like art form director since There Will Be Blood. But yeah, I was really impressed with those sequences in themselves. And I'd be curious to know what you think of it on a rewatch, Brendan, because if it's going to change.
That is a big thing I want to see if it shifts for me on a rewatch. And like I said, I can't really say it's a criticism or even a negative on my side yet, because PTA's movies are not really designed to be negatively critiqued right away. Like you have to understand what he's going for and uncover it further and dig deeper before you can actually recognize whether it's worth that type of criticism or not. Because that's one of the things about this movie that I guess the best way to say is I'm still wrestling with it, is the best way I can articulate it.
Well, and I think you make a great point, Matthew, in terms of why bringing some sort of personality, for the lack of a better term, to these characters, because ultimately what they embody is institutional racism, white supremacy, power, and we have seen that in movies since the beginning of time. How do you distinct yourself when these characters ultimately don't serve much of a purpose? And I didn't mention that in my opening thoughts. I do think that is important in terms of talking about the duality of this film, in terms of, in terms of the political extremisms of this film. And obviously you get to the humanity of the characters on the revolutionary side. But in terms of the Christmas Adventurers Club, there is a nothingness to that group. There's a nothingness to those
It's futile.
characters.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And they serve a function in terms of drama, in terms of plotting, in terms of getting us from A to Z. So how do we make them interesting instead of these mundane mechanisms that are necessary in terms of driving plot, and to give them this silly buffoonery aura to them, and you make fun of the ideology the way that he does, it injects this propulsive infusion of humor that serve, like, where he gets to have his cake and eat it too, where they serve their purpose dramatically, they do drive the plot, they get us from one point to the next, but in terms of the mockery of this film and highlighting both ends of the extreme, I think he absolutely gets to have his cake and eat it too in that regard.
Okay.
Speaking of characters, oh, sorry.
I know. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, speaking of characters, I did want to bring up one aspect of the film, and I want to see more on my second watch. I want to see how her arc is over the course of the film with Willa, because what I was impressed by, and something that I completely forgot about until someone brought it up in another video of theirs when they were doing spoilers. I love the fact that they already set up from the beginning when Willa's, the 16-year-old kid, she's introduced as like a student to Sensei with Benicio del Toro, how she's already become this, experienced enough of a fighter of sorts, especially, with the teachings of Sensei. And then she's taken away from the high school, thanks to Regina Hall's character, and taken to the, I can't remember what the place was called, but it was like a sister convent, where she's experienced more with hand-to-hand combat with the punching bag in the montage form, and even gun training as well. And that in of itself, those two instances of her training showcase that she is able to hold her own against the forces of evil, especially when she's already handcuffed or tied together with Ziploc ties or whatever, and she runs away from the corrupted police when the guy comes in and he's like, all right, I'm gonna even though I promised to Sean Penn's character Lockjaw that I would take her into this location. He's like, you know what, screw it, I'm changing my mind and I'm gonna set her free. And he starts going through a shootout. The moment that the guy takes out the gun and pops the first guy, it cuts away to Willa, and we stay on her the entire time. We hear gunshots going off, but we never see, and she never sees who gets shot and what happens. She just starts booking it to the car to where she's like, all right, I got to find the keys. And I love the fact that she takes on a more realistic approach of trying to find, I can't remember where she got the gun, whether it was from the car or whatever, but she takes the gun, and then she, instead of just running up to the guy and taking the keys like a movie would do, she does it like systematically, like step by step of like, okay, got to duck down, got to make sure that I got my cover, and I got to go in patiently. I can't just rush in case someone is there. And as she goes into the shop, everyone's dead. And then she's like, all right, now I got to rummage around for the keys. And then she takes the car and go. And I really love the fact that, again, they established, as I mentioned earlier, how PTA is doing two things at once. He is establishing a reality to this world, despite how ridiculous this is.
Certainly heightened, for sure.
And unfortunately, some of that is true with our society today. Let's be honest.
That's also true.
But also, it's the fact that he's able to do that, but also establish depth to the character, which is something I was a little bit worried about when we started off, when we got to like the halfway point where it was revealed that she was given a phone by Sensei. And I thought, oh, okay, she's going to be like this character that we have to care about. And, now she's like a damsel in distress. Like, oh, come on. But the moment that sold it for me is to like, okay, now I instantly care about her character, is the moment she finds out about the paternity test from Lockjaw, which is a great scene of itself, from like tension building and waiting for the lines to go. And her reaction when she finds out, oh, Lockjaw is my father, not Bob. And I love that reaction she gives of like, oh, like this is like the worst news she ever got, and no one even told her about this at all. In fact, I don't think anyone even knew that Lockjaw was her father, except for the paternity test of itself. And I was really impressed by that. And it even ties back into when we get to the ending of the film, which is like that car chase sequence is amazing. Very simplistic for what it is. But I also love that connection. Like she realizes that here she is, she's out in the world and such. And, she's like, I hate being with my dad, Bob. He's like, what is wrong with you? You're a drunk, you're on weed and, smoke a lot of crack or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And yet when she really, gets into this like horrible situation where she almost gets killed, by the way, because of her actions and such with the phone. And then she meets Bob at that desert. And even though she's in this mind frame that she was told by Regina Hall, you have to be in this like French 75 format where if you do not follow our codes, you will die. And even though she knows that's Bob, she still tries to insinuate the code and trying to hold up that maturity that she's been building up over the film. And then she just lets her guard down and just runs to Bob, and Bob gives her a hug, and they drive off. And I thought it was a really nice moment the two of them had. And, I thought that was a really, like, again, just establishing Willa as who I thought would be somewhat of a useless character, but made her actually a pretty strong and impactful character to the story as well. Not just with her own arc, but just to the overall story.
Yeah, I think Chase Infinity in this film, I mean, I believe you talked about her earlier. She is astounding. I do love the strength that she gives the character. PTA storytelling, the setups that you're talking about, I do think are effective. But I think why all of that deeply resonates is her performance and how she's able to give the character a level of vulnerability for sure, but also someone who knows how to fight herself out of these situations, or at least if she is going to go out, she's certainly going to go down swinging.
Yeah.
And that dichotomy in the character, I think, is absolutely fascinating. And it certainly leads to one of, if not the best scene of the year that everyone has been talking and raving about, that car chase sequence down the valley. The use of those long lenses as you go up and down the road. Whoever did the location scouting for this film, they deserve some sort of
They picked
Oscar.
the right road. They picked the right road. It's not just about the camera placement. It's the road choice.
The
That's
road
what
itself,
matters.
And doing it in daylight. That was also crucial too.
Absolutely. It is incredible. The tension and the thrill of that moment, how all of that comes together. Again, yes, some of it is PTA storytelling. It is the script and leading to that moment, but how it's performed, how it's shot, how it's scored, everything we've been talking about, the emotional underbelly of the film kind of leading the way there. And again, I love that final confrontation. Even as she sees Bob round the corner there, she's still calling for the codes. There's something so innately human about it, especially when earlier we talked about how everyone, when they were under the microscope, they gave in. Yeah. So again, of course, she would not necessarily trust anyone. But as this being a father-daughter movie, for it to kind of end that way where it's the two of them there, despite the test earlier, her reaction to seeing him, it's incredible storytelling.
And you also had...
I think part of the tension as well, sorry, one last thought here, but earlier you guys were talking about how PTA has always had this cynical backbone of sorts. I will admit that was absolutely in the back of my mind. I don't know if the PTA of this film was necessarily going to go in a different direction. The way it played out makes so much sense for this movie, but watching PTA throughout the years, it did call into question for me as to how this was going to end, because there is a version of PTA where it doesn't end the way that we see in this film.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So whether fairly or unfairly, that was certainly added to the tension of the moment. But I absolutely love it. And again, it leads to that letter ending that I mentioned earlier that I just think is absolutely exhilarating.
I also love too, with you going back to Magnolia a bit for his skills as a filmmaker, like he finessed his what he already did so well with Magnolia of having all these like heightened, emotionally tension filled moments in separate stories, even though it is one story, as we said with Magnolia. I love the fact that as Chase Infinity or Willa's character gets into the car and drives off, because we already know that she's not in the wreck with Sean Penn, but but Bob doesn't. So
He
No,
doesn't
good
know.
dramatic irony there.
and I
Yeah.
love the fact that and that's a great term, Brendan, dramatic irony, how she's driving off in the car, and then we see that wide shot of Bob sliding down the mountain, the road or
Yeah.
whatever, the hill. And I'm like, wow, like PTA does a really good job creating tension, like a tension-filled moment, but they're contextually different from each other. Like her situation is she needs to get out of there before anyone finds the bodies and comes after her. And then with the case of Bob, it's like, is she in the car? Is she in the car? And then he realizes, oh no, she's not in the car. All right, so where is she? I thought that was like a really good use of what dramatic irony that he used from Magnolia, and again perfected it here as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I also love too that they established even early on about how the trackers are, if someone has this tracker and they're nearby, they'll create a melody with each other. And that means you could trust them in any, you could trust them with your life. And that's brought into question when Regina Hall's character comes back into Willa's life. And then later on, when we see Bob meeting up with Willa on that road, and you see the harmony, the music, I think it might have been created by Johnny Greenwood as well, who created that that connecting music there.
I think so.
If he did, that's impressive. Holy crap. Because I honestly it felt like oh, they just used like a random stock music cue for that, and that's what they did. But no, good job, Johnny. Yeah, but I was really impressed with that for sure.
Yeah. Will's a very resourceful character, and a lot of that is because Will is also kind of a literal walking metaphor of sorts for this movie. Like what it means to actually bring a child into this specific radicalized America. I mean, it's kind of obvious, but it was also one of the taglines for this movie, if I'm not mistaken, about some people being born into battle, right? And she very much represents that. The Willa character is something I do want to pay attention to in a second viewing, like you said, Matthew. And a lot of it is because I do agree, and I love that she doesn't turn into a damsel. Like PTA does avoid that. There is a chunk of the movie where I felt like she was treated more as a MacGuffin than anything else, and I did find that a little frustrating. But I think a lot of that is because it's more so used to service the Bob arc, Leo DiCaprio's character at that point, before we get a little bit more of Willa in the climactic chase sequence, as we keep talking about. That's really where Chase Infinity's work as an actress brings some emotional nuances to the character that I don't necessarily think are on the page. I think it's one of those cases where her performance is maybe better than the writing of the character.
Oh,
if
yeah.
that makes sense.
Definitely.
Which in a way is it's a major credit to her performance. I am still wrestling with it a little bit because, like I said, I think there's a moment where I feel like she's treated more as an object that is more just to drive the plot along until it's not. But I wonder if that segment was too long for me to like. I almost feel like I have to be a little critical of that because I guess I would have liked to see a little bit more of that, given how powerful of a performance that she gives here.
Yeah, I do understand, and honestly, Brendan, I don't think you're wrong. There is a certain section of this film where she is treated as a MacGuffin, but I do think that is necessary for this film because it gives way for Leo to give us those moments I talked about earlier, which I do think is important leading up to.
And it's more his movie at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And it's also why I noted, as much as I love the little details that Matthew noted earlier, I do think once you get to that ending, it really is Chase Infinity's performance that goes above and beyond what's there on the page to revel in that dichotomy of the character, the vulnerabilities and the fear and the paranoia that she's experiencing, but also this knowable strength that she has that comes from her own upbringing and taking those classes with Sensei, but innately there's a lot of her mom there as well. And I do think the film goes out of its way to denote that. So that does come about for sure. And it's in Infinity's performance. It's in how PTA stages and composes much of the action there in the back half of the film. But I do think that craft is able to overcome what is there or what isn't there on the page. But leading up to that, I think there is a lot of character building in terms of Leo, and also a lot of the humor is in the midst of that section as well. And just as a work of entertainment, I don't mind that either. But again, even amidst all of the chaos of what Bob finds himself in, is Leo tapping into the vulnerabilities of that character. And again, his own fear and paranoia, that desperation to find her, that desperation to save her, because again, as this film being a movie about parenthood and generational consequences of being a revolutionary, I think all of that matters to this film. And not even just with Leo, much of it is with Leo for sure. But you also get that great moment with Regina Hall's character, Deandra, where she's also talking to Willow about her mom and her mom being a rat. And then ultimately, again, more irony that Deandra, when she's also put under the microscope, what does she do? She also succumbs as well. So there's so much work that the film is doing in terms of its broader themes, its characters, and emotional underbelly that I do think adds up. So when you get to those final sequences, despite her acting as a MacGuffin, and again, I do think you're right about that, I think the film puts its attention in the right places. So when it crystallizes at the end, there's a massive payoff.
Yeah, and it's not that it's unearned. I think it's still it leads to where it needs to go dramatically, and it still makes sense. So I don't necessarily disagree. I don't disagree with that at all.
Yeah. And the other comment I did want to make, though, in regards to Bob, because I was really impressed with how a lot of the comedic moments really surprisingly land for me. But also the one in particular was when he's being asked, like, what time is it? And he's like, I don't know the answer. He's like, I don't understand, how you don't know the answer to this question. It's pretty, it was in the book. And then after he gives like a different answer to be like, okay, you're definitely Bob. And he's like, oh, by the way, what was the answer to your question, by the way, that you've been asking? And I think I have the line right here. Time doesn't exist, yet it controls us anyway. And then he's like, you son of a bitch. And then that was hilarious.
It's
like
good.
his reaction to that line. Almost like, it's like, well, the answer, the simple answer to the question that was so easy to remember. And I was just like, oh God, it's like, even commenting about this idea of like, you're invading my space, sir. You're invading my space. And it's like, it's very much dealing with the times of now. Yeah.
Oh yeah. The writing in PTA's films is always biting. It's certainly no different in this film. Absolutely love it. Again, the performances are impeccable there. I know we're going a little bit long here, but I want to give you guys some space here for final thoughts. Do you have any final thoughts on this film before we get out of here?
That's a great question.
I was going to say, Brendan, do you want to go first?
No.
Okay.
No.
I actually did want to mention, going back to the action for final thoughts of the film or any other things I have left. Really impressed with how, for this being like Paul Thomas Anderson's first action-filled movie, he really, like as I said before, and I keep saying it again to other people, he really does a better job than what your average Joe Schmo is doing with like the Hollywood schlock system that's coming out, especially with like the bigger budgeted films. Because they're tension filled, they're simple, but yet they're precise. He knows exactly what he wants to do with those scenes, especially with the car chase he has at the end of the film. Just really solid. And also too, it reminded me, some of the directing sequences, it reminded me a lot of the 70s paranoia political thrillers. I just saw today, actually, Parallax View for the first time. And I thought it was okay. But what I was really impressed by was that it almost seemed like PTA took influence from that 70s, 60s era of like political films that we got at the time, and studied, how do I direct these sequences for my own movie? Like, how do I invoke that era of 70s political thriller? Because it does feel like a political thriller from that time, despite it being a modern movie.
It's got the grit of a 70s movie. It really does.
It does, yeah. And from the violence to the language to the characters, and the way that the story is being told, it really does have that grit to it. And it even evokes a little bit of like some what was it? I almost said Some Country. No Country for Old Men a little bit.
Yeah, it's got that contemporary Western kind of vibe to it.
Yeah, so he does a really good job with that, and I'm really, really, I shouldn't be impressed by PTA, but every time I watch a new movie of his, even if it's something I'm not the biggest fan of, like Inherent Vice, I'm like, all right, there's at least something in here worth the value that I'm like, I could recommend to someone, but it depends on the movie. But this one is like, I could easily throw this on and show it to someone. Like if they told me I've never seen a Paul Thomas Anderson film, I'm like, sure, I could show you the greats, like There Will Be Blood and Magnolia and Licorice Pizza, in my opinion. But let's start with One Battle After Another, and let's see where you go with
a good
this.
way to ease in, I guess. Yeah, I think maybe like this one and Boogie Nights might be the ones to really help ease people in a way.
Sure.
But yeah, like the filmmaker I was actually most reminded of here, and we sort of alluded to him already because we referenced how that opening car chase after the failed bank robbery attempt was very much inspired by the French Connection. But I did sense a lot of William Friedkin in this movie.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Specifically, I was thinking a lot about Sorcerer from what was that, 1977. Just some of the hypnotic undertones of its slow action sequences in that movie, I think, are also apparent here. And that's what makes PTA so interesting, is that he's kind of like a Quentin Tarantino in the way that he plays with genre, but he's also completely unlike Tarantino because he doesn't do it for homage. And that's not a bad thing when it comes to Tarantino. That's something he's very good at. He likes to play with genre as kind of a tribute to the way that they functioned at a different time. Whereas PTA is kind of using it as a sandbox to make his own thing. And every one of his movies at a surface level kind of feels like him exploring a new genre. So I guess my final thought is almost in the form of a question: where do we want to see him go from here? Because I have a clear, given his sensibilities, I have a clear answer for me at least. And I think he sort of did this already with There'll Be Blood, but it wasn't full on yet. I would love to see him do a horror movie. I want to see him do a straight up horror movie. And I think he's got the skills to do something kind of in the same vein that like a Robert Altman did in the 70s with movies like Images or Three Women, which are horror movies of a sort, kind of horror adjacent. But I would love to see him do something like that, given the way that he explores genre as a playground of sorts to do some interesting things. And I think that would be a really cool playground for him.
All I will say is that for my opinion, of course, because apparently I'm the odd man out on it. I hope that whatever Paul Thomas Anderson does next, it's either an original screenplay or he loosely adapts said source material, because he also did it with There Will Be Blood, and that was also a critical hit as well. Whereas Inherent Vice, it's very much a adaptation of the book, and I feel like the more faithful he becomes,
line for line in a way. There are some sequences that are ripped straight from Pynchon's book there.
Yeah, where it's like the more faithful you are to said book, the less interesting it is as a film. Because at that point, as he even said when he wrote the screenplay, he's starting to fall in love with the film, with the material, as opposed to telling the audience, "Hey, here's how I should tell you how to feel." Or do it in my own style of sorts, without having it feel so tied to the book.
Sure.
So, but horror is interesting for sure.
One element that I want to talk about with final thoughts as it relates to Paul Thomas Anderson and the details that he puts into his movies. And I don't know if this is entirely purposeful. It could be an interesting accident. I don't know. But knowing PTA, there was probably some level of intentionality to it. I think what's interesting is that when he depicts here in terms of power, as we talked about earlier, there's this level of cartoonishness to it, that the people in power, they're obviously radicalized by their own silly ideologies, even if it is all about hailing St. Nicholas. And the mockery in it all, I think, is absolutely hilarious. However, what's interesting is that as that trickles down, people that are committing that power into practice, that comes more from a level of pragmatism. So the soldiers in this film, there's a level of banality to them.
Yeah.
In fact, I was reading earlier that the interrogator character in this film, he's not an actor.
Yeah.
He's an actual military interrogator.
Yeah.
Which I think
that
is
was cool.
interesting.
It's captivating in this movie.
Absolutely. The other soldiers that come and go throughout the film, clearly there's a level of authenticity to that. What's interesting about Lockjaw is that I do think that he falls in the middle ground there. There's clearly a level of mustache twirly, but he's much more complex than the Christmas Adventurers Club as
easily,
they
yeah.
are depicted. So
Yeah.
Lockjaw, he finds himself in this space where there is a level of pragmatism to the character. There's obviously a complexity, but he's aiming for that cartoonishness. So there's still kind of a caricature-esque vibe to him at times in some of his responses. He's very much in that middle ground. And I think that's an interesting depiction of power, at least in terms of the satire here and the mockery of it. I find it compelling how it can transform someone from, as we were talking about earlier, how most of us kind of live in the middle, into this radicalized version of ourselves where we find ourselves hailing Saint Nicholas, so to speak. So like, I do find that detail to be quite fascinating in terms of adding depth to, again, a side of the story that isn't as focused on here, but that's what separates PTA from a lot of other filmmakers who would just introduce that side of the story as thin and one note, maybe banal and mundane, and it's just there to serve the plot, where here he does want to give it some sort of depth. There is meat on the bone there, even if it's not as much of an emphasis in the larger scope of the movie.
He's not
it's incredible.
jingling his keys in front of your face,
Right,
like
right.
a lot of other filmmakers would do, which I appreciate.
Yeah, same.
I very much appreciate that as well. And again, when you couple it with, at least I would argue, I don't think politics is the crux of this movie. And there's a lot of showing rather than telling, which is why I think ultimately that is so effective here.
Agreed.
I can't say enough good things about the casting of this film. This might be our first Oscar winner for best casting. I don't know how any of that is going to work, but good God. The casting of this film is just immaculate. And again, I can't say enough good things about PTA and what he does here in terms of the genre mixing and the balancing of tones. I mean, to be this political thriller, this dark comedy, this satire, this
Father-daughter
family
story.
drama, yes, all of that. It is unreal. Like, and there's a real urgency to it all that I just find unbelievable. Maybe I say that almost facetiously because it's Paul Thomas Anderson, so it's very believable, but it's still insane because you don't see it often.
Yeah.
And I do love it. I don't know where this ranks. I don't think I have this at number 1. This is certainly in my top 5 somewhere. As far as my PTA ranking goes, my initial instinct is probably that number 4 spot, but it's somewhere in that 3 to 5 range is kind of where I'm at as of right now. But I've only seen the film the one time. So who knows?
It's not my favorite film of the year, and that's primarily because I just don't think anything is going to top 28 Years Later for me. I don't think.
Oh yeah, that was a good movie.
Yeah.
I was like, what? I think Brendan's going to say Sinners, but I'm like, oh no, 28 Years Later. Yeah, that was pretty good. Yeah.
I think I might take this over Sinners, One Battle After Another, by a slight margin. Although I have to see Sinners again. I've only seen it the one time.
Same.
Yeah, I mean, I have all 3 of those movies are going to be in my top 5 somewhere, but I am not drawing any sort of line right now, especially given what I've heard about some of the festival films. I have a good feeling those are going to register very, very deeply with me. So I don't know yet.
You're the litmus test for Hamnet, JD. If that movie doesn't work for you, then everyone out there's lying.
Yeah. That's the big one, because if that film doesn't land in my top 5, then there's either something wrong with me. Maybe I should end this whole crusade and movies just aren't for me anymore.
You've officially become a replicant.
Yes, maybe that's it. I don't know.
Oh, man.
But I have a very good feeling that film will land in that top 5. Who knows? Maybe even that number 1 spot. So who knows? I don't want to draw a line quite yet. I do think 28 Years Later is the best film I've seen so far this year, hands down. And it'll end up in my top 5 at the end of the year. I just don't know where yet, where that's going to land.
Yeah. I'll tell you what other movie has still been sneaking up higher for me. And we talked about it when we did our mid-year report a few months ago. But even as I think about it, I'm liking Ephus more and more as I think about that one. That one's growing for me.
Yeah, Ephus is good. That one's still in my top 10. Really liking the Spike Lee joint a lot. Keep thinking about that one. I mean, I haven't loved this year to this point as comparatively to others, but as always, this will always be the case until Hollywood self-destructs, and who knows, that could be very soon. But until that happens, the top end of the year will always be great.
Yeah.
And I have
just
no doubt.
Is the depth there?
Yeah, that'll be the question.
Yeah.
And I very much have questions at this point, but we'll see. I don't want to get ahead of myself.
I also have questions, but it's more with Oscars, but we could talk about off air maybe.
For sure. All right, we'll go ahead and end it there. That is our review of One Battle After Another. If you agree or disagree with us, you can leave a comment below. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, reach out to us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky. We would love to hear from you. Matthew, thanks for being here. Really do appreciate you.
Anytime. Yeah, this was fun. I could have gone on for like another half hour because I have other notes, but don't worry. I think a second rewatch, or a second watch, I should say, would probably give me like even more notes. Like, where am I ranking? But I will say also, right now I have it in my top 3, but I could see this. Like I said earlier, I really could see. I'm getting really close to giving it a 10. I'm waiting on that second watch to be like, where do I land with this, and how much more can I get out of this? Because it really is, as you even mentioned too, PTA is not the kind of filmmaker where you could just watch this movie and be like, okay, I know exactly what I think of what he has to say. And it's like, no, you need another watch to be like, to get through everything.
And that's the thing with this one. I feel like, and this is not a bad thing, but I feel like this one, One Battle After Another, is a bit more immediate than, let's say, some of his other movies. And again, that's not a bad thing, because a filmmaker like PTA can't make the same type of psychological confusion and peculiar aspects to all of his films over and over again. He can't do it every single time. Every director needs to branch out and try and go for a different agenda. And he certainly does that here.
Yeah. I'll be really curious to hear your thoughts on rewatch, Brendan, because knowing you, I think you're going to respond more positively on a second watch.
Most likely. I
think you will.
That has usually been the case with every PTA film for me, except for Boogie Nights. That's the only one I like less each time.
Yeah. But I think with this one, I think you'll certainly go for it. I'm probably deeply excited. I know I'm going to fall in love with this more. I know you guys mentioned it. I didn't even bring it up, but on another go, I really want to focus more on the visuals and cinematography here, because I do find this film quite painterly at times. I do love the variance in terms of the cinematography here. And also the close-ups. Again, I love those intimate close-ups that we get here. And for a film that's nearly 3 hours, it felt like it was 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Like, the editing here is just ridiculous.
Yeah, it's really good.
Really good.
I would be surprised if this did not take home the editing Oscar.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's unbelievable. And again, I think the brilliance of the editing, as much as it moves, again, it doesn't skip out on those small moments, on those quiet moments. It does linger when it needs to. It picks and chooses appropriately. That's, again, the brilliance of it. But at any rate, I think you're going to respond better the next time, Brian. I'm very excited.
You're probably right. You're probably right.
Comes. Matthew, before we get out of here, where can we find you and your work online, my friend?
You could find me tied up in the underground of the Christmas adventures. No, I'm kidding. No, yeah, this I had to throw in a joke there. No, you could find me, find myself, my podcast, the Lone Screenplay Nominee Podcast, under Linktree at Matthew995. We could again just follow me on all my social media there. I have a list of podcast episodes I've done for my show. I've been, guests on other ones. This will be added to the list when it comes up online. Also have a Patreon page as well, in case anyone out there is interested in becoming a supporter of that, for the After Hours Patreon, where we'll be covering Lone Tech winners. JD Duran has already been on for First Man. I think we have something else planned in mind for the future, whether it's for the main show or Patreon. I'll double check my guest schedule. Brendan, you're more than welcome to come on my show.
That'd be great.
Down the road, whether it's main show or Patreon. But yeah, so I'll do Lone Tech winners, Lone Director winners, maybe by next year. And then pretty soon we're going to be getting into our Lone, Screenplays beating out the Lone Nominee. So something like Honora, Manchester by the Sea, and then what was another one? Bad and the Beautiful will be another one we'll be covering down the road. So those are just some of the examples that I have for like Screenplays beating out Lone Nominees. But honestly though, like I said, if you cannot afford to be a Patreon member, I understand. Just pass the word along. Any and all word of mouth helps out for my channel. And by becoming a member for my Patreon, you not only support the show, but you also support myself. So once again, thank you guys for having me on the show.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, we loved having you here. Be sure to go and support Matthew's work. Really, really great stuff. Love what you do over there.
Thank you.
We will have another review coming soon as well. We're going to be talking about James Sweeney's Twinless, so you can be on the lookout for that. And episode 656, I believe it is,
Nice. That sounds
coming
right.
later this week as well. I think we're going to be covering sports movies in some way, shape, or form with the Smashing Machine coming out very soon. I think that is the plan, so you can be on the lookout for all of that. There will be a new Chasing the Gold episode this week, new women in session as always, so you can be on the lookout for all of that. With that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks, Matthew, for being here once again. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast.